The Galaxy S20 line is going to be unveiled on the 11th of February in San Francisco, California, at the Bill Graham Auditorium, and there have been basically leaks upon leaks upon leaks that, well, we pretty much know everything that there is to know about it. So I wanted to make a video here about just generally what we know about the phone, and then also a couple of things that have given me pause, that I have questions about. So let's just jump right into it and look at some of this stuff, because I think it's worth looking at. Now, here we have GSM Arena, right? GSM Arena, great website. They've put up all the different specs. We're looking here at the Samsung Galaxy S20 5G. 6.2-inch screen, 1440 by 3200, 64 megapixels. Is that, yeah, that's the camera. And then 12 gigabytes of RAM. That's a lot. That's a lot of gigabytes. And 4,000 milliamp hour battery. That's better than any of the phones, any of the lower end phones in the S10 lineup last year. What else does it have going on that we can be excited about? Well, it's got the same kind of, Super AMOLED, dynamic AMOLED, I guess they're calling it now, Infinity O display. And it's going to have 128 gigabytes of storage with that 12 gigabytes of RAM. The camera is going to be 12 megapixels on a wide angle, 64 megapixels on a telephoto, 12 megapixels again on the ultra wide, and then the selfie camera 10 megapixels wide angle. And the video stuff is a little odd. You can do 2160p, 30 and 60 frames, but only 1080p is only 30 frames. So that's a little odd. But whatever. Another big feature this year that everybody's talking about is the 120 hertz displays that these phones and many others are going to have this year. The OnePlus 7 Pro had the 90 hertz display. Before that, the Razer Phone 2 had a 120 hertz display. 120 hertz displays are nice. Now, don't get me wrong. They are nice. They do look snappy. They do look good. I have some other thoughts about 120 hertz displays and how much they really, really, really don't matter to a smartphone otherwise. If you want me to make that video, let me know down in the comments, and I will make that video about 120 hertz displays and why they don't matter on a smartphone whatsoever. Samsung, they put these bigger batteries into these phones in part because the 120 hertz display is going to draw a lot more battery power, which means a lot more battery drain, which means that they are going to there are going to be problems. There are going to be problems. So one thing that Samsung has done is that in regular 60 frames per second, 60 hertz display, you can do the 1440p ultra super fancy, and in 120 hertz, they've limited you to only 1080p. Now, seeing the difference between 1440 and 1080p is really, really difficult. I don't think that anyone on a blind test with the naked eye could really tell the difference in a blind test. Maybe I'll test that out when the phones come out. It's kind of weird that they limited it to 1080p. So keep that in mind. Now, moving on from there, we've got 3 different phones in this lineup. We have the S20 Plus, 6.7 inches, 64 megapixels camera, 12 gigabytes of RAM, 4,500 milliamp hour battery. So we got a half-inch bigger screen. We got 500 milliamp hours more battery. Everything else here is pretty much the same. And so this is just a bigger version of the S20. What Samsung has done this year is they've copied Apple. They copied Apple. Last year, Apple went from the 10R to the 11 for their base model, and then they went to the 11 Pro and the 11 Pro Max. This year, Samsung is ditching the 10e and going with the S20 instead. The S20 Plus is the slightly bigger one that would have been the S10, and then the S20 Ultra is the big boy. So that's what we've got here. Speaking of that phone, let's just move up and take a look at that. Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra, 6.9-inch screen. That is big. That is a big phone. That is a big phone. You used to be able to buy 7-inch tablets, and people were like, oh my God, and now we got 7-inch phones. Anyway, 108 megapixel camera. 108 megapixel camera. 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM. I think that this is not correct. I think it's 12 to 16, but we'll see. 5,000 milliamp hour battery. That is a huge battery. That is a great thing. I mean, battery is always a great thing for phones. There's no way around it. More battery is always good. So I'm glad that we're getting more battery in these phones, even if it is to offset the 120 hertz. You can probably turn the 120 hertz off, which I'd recommend. So we've got the Snapdragon 865 chip. Elsewhere, you're going to get the Exynos 990. So this phone, the Ultra, has a few differences. You've got the 128 and 12 gigabytes of RAM. You've got the 512 and 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I want to remind you that all of this is speculation to a certain extent. There have been a lot of leaks that have told us a lot of things about these phones, but we can't actually say that any of this is actually true until we get to February 11th and Samsung puts them out there and we see them and know. But I think it's a pretty safe bet that the majority of this stuff is factual. So 512 gigabytes of storage and 16 gigabytes of RAM is a crazy, crazy amount of stuff. 108 megapixel camera in the wide angle. This camera is going to work differently than the other cameras. Let's just say that. And whether or not it makes a huge difference is going to be something that we'll have to focus on in another video down the line. We've got 48 megapixel telephoto. We've got 12 megapixel ultra wide, 40 megapixel dual pixel autofocus selfie camera, but still only 1080p at 30 frames per second. This is a very impressive phone. Samsung has hit almost all of the points. Samsung has just knocked it out of the park, except there are a few things that I feel like it's necessary to discuss about this, one of which being the fingerprint reader. The fingerprint reader might be the best thing ever. Last year, they brought in the under-the-screen ultrasonic fingerprint readers, and they weren't very good. They weren't very fast. They weren't very reliable. I did not have good luck with either the S10 Plus or the Note 10 Plus that I had. This year, they're supposed to be much improved. We'll see. We'll see. But one thing that I have to mention is that for the first time, the Galaxy S line will not have a headphone jack. So do with that what you will. If you watch the channel, you know how I feel about headphone jacks, and I think this kind of stinks, but progress, bigger battery, I don't. Anyway, I'm not going to complain about it too much. Well, I'm going to complain, but we'll move on. The thing that really worries me, the things that I discovered this as I was reading through some stuff over the weekend and then into the beginning of this week. It has to do with the speed of the chips that are inside of the Galaxy S20 phones. Now, people will have a lot to say about whether or not synthetic benchmarks really matter. Do they matter in day-to-day use? Well, you can't really say, because everybody uses their phone differently, and so therefore there's just no way to say one person's usage over another is going to be good versus bad, etc., etc. But synthetic benchmarks are good for just having a baseline, a benchmark for what we can expect from performance from these devices. The higher the numbers, the better the performance. More gigabytes of RAM does help, but this is what we use these benchmarks for, just generally to sort of say, here's what you can expect from this. Here's what you can expect from this. Software and other hardware will have something to do with the actual performance of the phone. Here's where I was given pause. So right here we have the Samsung Galaxy S20 benchmark. This is the Geekbench score for the Snapdragon 865 processor. It's an 8-core processor, 1.80 gigahertz, 561-2358. Well, we'll see. Let's move up to the Ultra and see what that has to say. 923. Okay, so we're almost double the single core score, and 3267. Not quite looking at getting toward double of the multi-core score, but that's better, right? That's better. Yeah, and so But I did a little digging. I wanted to do some comparisons, and of course I'm going to compare an iPhone to the Samsung phone. They're the two biggest phone manufacturers out there. They're the competition. They compete between one another. And so I went ahead and I looked at the most recent iPhone, the iPhone 11 Pro. What is the boom? That's the single core and multi-core score for the iPhone 11 Pro Max. 1330, 3,436, 1330, 3,400, and this is even more surprising. Now, the thing to know about the iPhones is, whereas it's a 6-core processor, it's at 2600 megahertz. It's the A13 Bionic chip. It's a different kind of thing altogether. An iPhone uses the resources differently, etc., different software, all that stuff. However, again, you can use this to compare. People do it with PCs all the time, to compare what the speed is when you're looking at one chip versus the other, so that you can know what you're buying and what you're expecting. Okay? So we have 561 single core, 2358, 1330, 3436. We get a little bit better with the Ultra at 923 and 3267. We're close with the multi-core score, which is cool. But I figured I should go back and find like what iPhone compares well with these brand new Samsung phones. So we've got this. Boom. The iPhone 8 Plus with the iPhone 8 Plus still beats the single core, doesn't beat the multi-core. A single core score here on the S20 doesn't even come close. The single core, multi-core score on the S20 is comparable. 100 and something points off. Again, does this matter? In everyday use, probably not. The majority of people will probably not see any difference. But, Samsung in general has had a reputation for their phones lagging. I know it's gotten better over the years, but it has been a thing that people have complained about. As the phone gets older, it doesn't have the same speed available to it, that kind of thing. You could make the argument that that not as powerful a chip might be better for battery life and that kind of thing. Samsung has some makeup to do on battery life compared to this year's iPhones as well. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. It's going to be interesting to see if this matters all that much. The iPhones have typically had better benchmark performances than the Qualcomm chips and that kind of thing. It just really shocked me how different they were and how different they were from phone to phone. Yes, this is probably not the final software that Samsung is using, but it's Android 10, it's Samsung, a brand new version of Samsung One UI. I didn't think that we would see something this shockingly different. What do you think? Does any of this matter? Are you excited about the Galaxy S20? Are you going to go buy one of the Galaxy S20s? Why? Why not? Let me know. Down in the comments below, we'll have a boisterous discussion. Once again, thanks so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. My name is Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is Painfully Honest Tech. Tech so honest it hurts. Until the next time, I'm out.